Renting an apartment in the Czech Republic can be tricky even for Czech citizens. So left alone expats as you who just moved to the Czech Republic from a different country with different rules and different regulations and different lease agreements. So I decided to give you 5+2 tips on renting an apartment in the Czech Republic safely. So let's go. These are the 5. I will first read them so you understand what we'll be going through, and then I will go into details where I will always tell you the important parts. So step number 1 or tip number 1, make sure that you get a contract. Plus an extra one, make sure that you see the apartment before you sign the lease. I will elaborate on that in a second. Number 2, check the important parts of the lease agreement, like ownership, status of the flat. I will talk about that a bit more as well. Duration of the lease agreement, leave-in notice, deposit, pets. Check the landlord's ID as well. Tip number 3 or 4, get confirmations of all the payments you are making. Number 4 or 5, try all the keys. That might sound funny, but I will tell you even funnier story. And number 5+1 is try all the appliances and take photos of the apartment. So now let's go through the tips one by one, and I will always explain what I mean by that and what is important for you to know. So tip number 1, make sure you get a contract. This might sound stupid, but you would be surprised, I believe, if you knew how many people live in the Czech Republic or in Prague without having a lease agreement. It can happen in various ways. Sometimes it's because the landlord doesn't want you to doesn't want to give you a lease agreement for tax evasion reasons, or they just live somewhere far away, or they know you. It can also happen that you know someone and they will rent an apartment to you just based on some agreement, like spoken oral agreement. But if you don't have a lease, you don't have rights. You don't have rights, you don't have proof of anything. So if you agree on something with the landlord that the rent will be 15 and they tell you next month, okay, it will not be 15 but 30, if you don't have a lease agreement, you have nothing. Okay, so it might sound stupid, but in some cases it can happen that someone will offer you to live in an apartment without the lease. But if you do that, you risk and you basically have no security, nothing. So the +1 tip here would be to see the apartment before you move here. Of course, we work with expats. So we know that in many cases, it's not possible for you to come here and watch apartment or see apartments before you sign the lease agreement, that you kind of need to do it online. But that's how, in my opinion, 99% of scams happen. That you don't even see the apartment and someone wants you to pay and someone wants to like sign a lease agreement or send your ID or your passport scan to them. And this is where most of the scams happen. It's kind of difficult to scam you if you are already in the apartment, if you are showing the apartment, or if someone is showing you the apartment. That would need to be a really like elaborate scam. It happens. There was a case where a guy was like showing apartments and taking money and signing lease agreements, even though the apartment wasn't his, to be like sublet or let to someone. I believe he was just like taking care of the apartments for someone, and he decided to scam it like this or use it like this. So that can happen as well, but most scams happen before you even see in the apartment. So if you don't see an apartment, that's okay, that can happen. If you're fine with not seeing the apartment where you are going to live, probably I would personally not do that. I want to see apartments where I live, because you need to feel the place, you need to see the neighborhood, you want to speak with the landlord, you just want to check everything. Because if you sign a lease, pay the deposit, and then you come to the apartment and you just don't like it at all, what will you do? But okay, if that happens and if you have to do it and you're comfortable with that, then make sure that you double check everything even more, or triple check everything, quadruple check if it's a word, and make sure that you will not get scammed, because many people get scammed in the Czech Republic and in Prague, because the scammers are getting better. The scams look more and more realistic, and plus the pressure of the market, where you have to fight for the apartment with like hundreds of other people interested in the apartment. That's like a good environment for scammers. So you need to be super careful if you don't see the apartment in person, in real. Let me just see, because it happens that something pops up here. It didn't, so that's good. So yes, that was tip number 1+1. And now, tip number 2, check the important parts of the lease agreement. This is one of the most common things or most common questions we get, aside all these like other tips I will be talking about. But if someone contacts us, usually the question is, hey, could you check our lease agreement, or what we should be careful about? We will be using the lease agreement or the flat for our visa application. So what we need to be careful about? So you need to be careful about these things. Number 1, ownership of the apartment. Because for that has 2 reasons why to check the ownership of the apartment. First, that you know that the person you're speaking to, what's their relationship to the apartment and what you can expect. Of course, the best is if you're signing the lease directly with the owner of the apartment, or owners, if there are more. Sometimes it doesn't have to happen, because they have someone like a manager taking care of that, or their daughter or their mother, or they just hired someone to deal with the apartment. So that's fine. You don't have to always sign the lease with the owner. But if you don't, you need to have all the paperwork proving the connection between the owner of the property and the person you're dealing with. So in most cases, they would have a power of attorney from the landlords to represent them in dealings with the apartment. Or they can also have their own lease agreement. That's pretty common in case of companies, like management companies, that they lease the apartment from the owner and then they sublease it to their tenants. So that's possible. It's okay. It can be legal and real, but you need to get all the chains or all the pieces of the chain. So from the owner to you must have all the documentation. Second thing is, especially if you're applying for visas, the ownership is the first thing the ministry will be checking when they're checking your application. They will be checking the ownership of the place where you live, and if the proof of accommodation you provided was signed by the person or not. So also from the perspective of your visa or residence permit, whatever you're applying for, this is one of the most important parts. So check the ownership. Status of the flat is the second thing to check, and that has, again, like 2 sub points. First is if the flat is actually a flat. Again, it might sound stupid, as many things in Czech immigration and in leasing apartments here as well, but sometimes, and even in new projects, and sometimes especially in new projects and newly built apartments, the flat doesn't need to be necessarily listed in all the official databases as a flat. It can be listed as an office, or in Czech, the most common thing is that it's listed as Atelier. It's like a space for artists, let's say. And the reason or the problem with that is if it's listed as anything else than apartment or a family house, so Atelier or business space or an office space or whatever, then you cannot officially live there. So that's one thing, that you cannot live there. Second thing is that because of that, you cannot use it for any official purposes. So if you want to live in an atelier, or if you want to sign a lease for an atelier, then you need to be aware of the fact that you will not be able to use it for any official purposes. That's one thing. Another thing maybe connected to the ownership is that there is something called družstvo, like housing cooperative in the Czech housing market. And that's if you sign a lease with družstvo, or if the flat is owned by družstvo, it might be very difficult for you to get all the paperwork you need, because it's a special type of like arrangement So the get into the actual owner of the apartment is kind of difficult sometimes. So the first thing was if the flat is actually a flat. Second thing is that you can also check if the flat is not undergoing some kind of, if it's not in some kind of problems or change of ownership or something. Because if you're signing a lease with a person who's selling the apartment, then obviously once they sell it, you will need to sign a new lease. And if this happens during your visa approval process, that can be a problem. Also, I'm not saying it's more or it's happening more often now, but we actually had clients in the office earlier today, and there was something happening with the apartment. And when we were talking to the clients, it turned out that the owner has some problems. I don't know, too high mortgage, because now the mortgage rates are crazy, in my opinion. And if you're refixing that, if you're changing the mortgage rate, it can like increase your monthly payments a lot. So I guess there will be people who will not be able to pay mortgages. And if they cannot pay the mortgage, then the apartment will be taken from them and given to the bank or given to someone else. So that can also be a problem for your visa application and for using the lease for some official purposes. So that's also very important to check. Number 3, or this like in this section of what I'm talking about, is the duration of the lease agreement. Because again, it's related to, like, maybe one thing to say is that the custom in the Czech Republic is 1-year lease. That's what everyone expects you to sign. Usually landlords don't want to do shorter, longer. That happens, especially if the apartment is more expensive, like 30,000 crowns and higher. Then you might be asked to sign 2 years lease, but 1 year is like a standard what you should always expect, or in most cases. This is also related to your visa somehow, because, for example, if you're applying for a long-term visa, then the validity of the visa depends on the validity of your lease agreement. So if you, for example, get a lease agreement only for 6 months, if your landlord agrees to that, then your visa will be shortened accordingly. So you will either get the visa only for 6 months or even for shorter period, because if you get it for 6 months now and you get the visa approved like 3 months later, then you only have 3 months left of the lease agreement, and so you only get the visa for 3 months. So this is important from couple perspectives as well. Leave-in notice is another thing you should check, because generally in the Czech law or in the Czech lease agreements, you have 2 or 3 months of leave-in notice. So on one hand, it means that you need to stick, or you need to keep paying the lease agreement for the next 2-3 months, even if you know that you want to move away immediately. On the other hand, it's not like in some other countries where you just cannot break the lease at all, or if you break it, you need to pay the rest of the rent for the rest of the period. In the Czech Republic, it's not like that. So if you, for example, live in the apartment for 3 months and then you know that you don't want to live there anymore and you want to move, you just give your landlord a notice, 2 or 3 months usually, and then you can leave the apartment after the 2-3 months finish, and you can move to your new apartment. So check this as well. Security deposit, by the Czech law, landlords are allowed to request up to 6 months of rent as a deposit. I've seen it once. I don't think if anyone rented the apartment ever, but I've seen it. But generally, you are requested 1 or 2 monthly rents as the security deposit in standard contracts. But what is important to check here is how and when the deposit will be returned to you. Because I don't think it's very common that Czech landlords would try to like kind of rob you of the deposit, so that they would be checking all the like small scratches on the wall so they can deduct it from your deposit at the end of the lease. I don't think it's too common. Czech landlords still kind of keep common sense, I would say, and the standard wear and tear kind of works here. But what I've seen in some contracts is that the deposit will be returned to you after, for example, 6 months when you finish the lease. So after 6 months from that, they will give you the deposit back only. So there are things like that, and there are other things that, if I talked about like everything in detail, we would be here for like 3 hours, which no one wants. But there are so many things, but this is the most important, like how and when the deposit will be returned. Pets, that's another interesting topic. Officially, Czech landlords do not have the right to ban you from having pets in the apartment. So if you have pets, you can move to any apartment you want by the law. But of course, if they don't want pets in the apartment, they will choose someone else. So like by the law, they cannot disqualify you or disadvantage you because of having pets. But in real life, of course, it works like that. So I would probably, you don't have the obligation to tell anyone about pets. So if you go see the apartments and you're not holding the dog or the cat or chinchilla or whoever in your like purse, you don't have to tell them. But if you then get the lease agreement and you see that pets are forbidden, even though you know that by the law it doesn't matter, so you can have the pet there if you want, it probably shows that the relationship between you and the landlord would not start from the good point if you knew that they don't want to have pets in the flat and you still get pets in the flat because you know that you are allowed to do that by the law. So yeah, check what the lease agreement says about it. And check landlord's ID as well, because the thing is that most landlords will request your passport or national ID or whatever to prepare the contract. And also when you go sign the lease agreement, when you go pay the deposit and stuff like that, they will want to see your passport or ID to make sure that it's you, and they usually make a copy or photo to have it in their file in case something happens, they can find you, all that. But tenants usually don't request this, or from my experience, they don't request this from the landlords, because they kind of automatically expect the person dealing with them to be the landlord and to be who they say they are. In most cases, yes, it's like that, of course, and maybe 99% of cases, but sometimes it's not. And if it's your case when it's not, you're beep. So always ask the landlord or the person who's signing the lease with you or who's giving you the apartment, showing you the apartment, always ask them for their IDs as well to make sure that you know who the person is and that the person is who they say they are. So tip number 3, officially, get confirmations of all payments. Still, a very common practice in the Czech Republic is that you pay the first rent, deposit, and often the commission of the real estate agent as well, in cash. Okay, so you go to the real estate agent's office or you go to the apartment to sign the lease agreement and you bring like 3 monthly rents in cash. So then definitely if you do it this way, make sure that it's either written in the contract specifically and in all the originals, okay? Because sometimes it's written, it's included in the contract, like in the printed version. Sometimes you just write it in hand, like we confirm that this money was received on this date, blah, blah, blah. But if it's only written in your contract and not in their version, then it will have no legal value because the landlords could say, yeah, but you wrote it yourself. In our version, it's not there. So, so always if something is handwritten in the contract, including these payments or confirmation of payments, make sure that it's in all the different originals and the same wording and everything. So there are no questions on who actually wrote it. Because it's not always only about like the landlords trying to beep you. But if you live in the apartment for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, you will hardly remember like if you gave them 12,300 deposit or 13,200 deposit. You know, so it's also important for you, even if both the sides are like reasonable, still you can forget, the time will fly. So it's better to have everything written. If you send money via bank transfer, always ask the landlord to maybe send you a text message saying, I received that, or send you an email, yes, the money was delivered, whatever. So you also have some written confirmation from them that the money was delivered. Tip number 4, I will just check again yeah, that's okay, because there is always an update of my Apple Watch and it freezes the stream, so you would only hear me but not see me. So I need to check it from time to time. So number 4, try all the keys. That might again sound stupid, but I have a story. We had a client from the US. She was a very young girl. She moved here when she was, I don't know, like 17 or 18, like right after school. The first time she could, she moved here. And we found an apartment for her. She moved in. Everything was fine. I think it was me actually, or one of my colleagues, I don't know. If you need any help, of course, with that, let us know. We'll be happy to help you find an apartment and make sure that all the contracts and everything goes smoothly, but that's not the point. Anyway, so we handed over the apartment, everything seemed to be fine, and then we got a call from this girl saying that she cannot open the apartment and that she's been already like sitting on the corridor for a couple hours, and that she just couldn't unlock the door. So I believe it was me who went back there, and the only problem with that was that she was used to, from the US, she was used to lock in the door in the opposite direction. So in the Czech Republic, we lock it to the right, like the I don't know how it's called, like the time or clock, whatever. It's too late in the evening, sorry guys. So you turn it to the right if you're locking, and if you're unlocking, you turn the key to the left. But in the US, apparently it was different. It was the other way around. So she was trying to unlock the apartment and she was actually locking it. So that was the only reason why she was like sleeping for 5 hours like on the corridor, because she just couldn't get in. So that's one kind of a funny story, but not really funny probably if you have to spend like 5 hours sitting somewhere waiting for someone. But that's only one thing that's kind of, at least the key worked. She just didn't know how to use it. But in some cases, I've seen it as well. I'm not saying like many times, but I've seen it, that landlords, for example, give you different keys because they own more apartments and they just get it confused. Or also if you own an apartment for years, you have like the locks changed and you have a couple versions of the apartments, or you have like different keys from their different like cellars or like balconies or whatever. You have different keys. And sometimes it happens that the keys get confused and they really give you different set of keys. And that's the worst scenario, that you leave the apartment, for example, and that then you cannot get in, not because you don't know how to unlock the door, but because you have a different set of keys. So always when you're taking over the apartment and when the landlords are still there, make sure that you try all the keys from the apartment, from the building, from the trash bins or whatever, from the mailbox, that you really go and try all of them. And then number 5 and 6, so number 5 plus 1 extra tip, try all the appliances as well, because again, for us, if you're moving within the Czech Republic, probably not too many things will surprise you. Of course, different types and brands of washing machines might have different settings, all that. So it's good to remind yourself as well. But especially if you're moving from a completely different country, how to use the stove might be like a challenge, because I don't know, we've still used gas stoves, for example. And if you've never used gas before, it can be even dangerous for you, because if you do something incorrectly, you can either like get poisoned by the gas, or it can like explode if you let it like whatever flow for too long and then you start the fire. So there are some important things you should know, because we also have, for example, this thing which is called boiler for water. So in some apartments, you only have like 100 liters or 50 liters, depending on the size of the boiler, of hot water every day. So it's not like you can get the hot water anytime, but you need to be careful about the consumption. And I've seen that also as a kind of surprise for many people, that they were calling us or they were calling the landlord, hey, the hot water doesn't work, it doesn't flow. And then we explain, yeah, because you've used all the the whole like reservoir for that. So there is no hot water, so you need to wait until it boils again. So these are small things, but it can be very important and very confusing if you're moving from other countries. So make sure that when you're taking over the apartment, you get everything explained and that you understand, especially the heating. Like I've seen so many different heating systems as well. And sometimes it's kind of magic to start them in the winter. And if you move here in the winter and then you don't know how to start your heating, for example, that's not good. And the plus one tip is always make sure that you take photos of the apartment when you're moving in. So when you're handing over the apartment or taking over the apartment from the landlords, try to look for any possible like damages, scratches, whatever. Take photos of that, upload it to some file, online folder, share it with the landlord. Because then again, if you live in the apartment for 3 years, and after 3 years, you will be arguing if this scratch was on the wall already when you moved in, or if this window was slightly broken when you moved in. No one will remember. So it doesn't have to be about like you trying to hurt the landlord or the landlord trying to rip you off from your deposit, that you just don't remember. You think you remember, okay, I don't remember any broken windows. That is just because you don't remember. So it might have been there. But if you take photos, then everything is clear. You can check the photos. You see that the window wasn't broken. So obviously it's your fault, or it was broken. So you don't need to pay anything for that. So that's very important in my opinion. Make sure that you have all the photos taken. And if there is anything important, it's also good to write it into the handover protocol. So if you're taking over the apartment, and you write down the list of the furniture and the readings of the meters and everything, then also write down any potential damages that you find. So again, if you're moving from the apartment, it's written somewhere, it's in the lease agreement. Make sure that it's in all original copies of the lease agreement and the handover protocol, and there are no doubts on what you destroyed or what you didn't destroy. So yeah, hopefully these tips were helpful. Thank you very much, guys, and see you again Monday, Thursday, until the end of the world. See you guys. Good night.